Hello YouTube, this is Asatsu5, and the region that I'd like to talk about next is France, the country of France. And by far, France has the most underrated and underappreciated cutlery industry in the United States. A lot of people in the United States, when they think of cutlery producing regions, they think of Japan, they think of Germany, maybe Sheffield, or China, Japan, these different places. But you often don't think of France, which France has contributed to the cutlery industry most famously with the chef's knife. But they also have a lot of regional pocket knives, and within the country of France, those different regions that have their own knife. You got the Thesaurus knife, I can't remember how to pronounce it. You got the Opinel, you got the Nortel, you got the Laguiole, the Duc knife. And a lot of these knives were peasant knives, and then they kind of evolved into a more elegant, more higher class knife. But let's talk about the Nortel and the Opinel because they're the most similar. And basically, the Nortel is the oldest continuing knife company, I think, in Europe. I think it predates Sheffield. I think it was around the 15th century. I could be wrong. I have to do some more research on it. But this knife predates the Opinel, and it's very similar. Has a improved or better blade shape. I much prefer this blade shape to the Opinel blade shape. Has a twisting collar lock, and these come in both ebony and boxwood. And the boxwood, they usually have designs burned into them, and they have different handle shapes. This is the ball blade shape. They got a violin blade shape. They got a fishtail blade shape. And this is my favorite. This is almost like, I sometimes refer to it as a tuxedo knife because it's black. Has some silver coloring to contrast to it. To me, it's just a beautiful knife, very elegant. This is one of my favorite dress knives. And basically, Opinel wanted to be a more affordable version of this, and I'm going to go ahead and show you my Opinel. I do have Opinel number 8, I just don't know where it is at the time. But this is the Opinel. This is the 10, I believe, 10 or 11. And this is carbon steel. And this has a more, I guess you could say, food prep or upswept blade shape. I usually kind of use Opinels for cutting up food when I do use them. Opinels are not my favorite, and they're not bad, but they're just not my favorite. To me, they're uglier unless you get a custom modded one. They're not as useful in the blade shape. I prefer the Nortel blade shape, but these are very, very cheap and affordable, depending on what model you get. You can get some Opinels with horn, you can get them with Babingo wood, olive wood, but the standard Opinel is very, very affordable. And I want to mention this, something that's very much very common with all these cheap regional knives like the Hiko-Nagami, the Duc, the Opinel, the K55K. They come to you out of the box really dull, and you have to sharpen them yourselves. They still have an edge on them. You can still cut with them, but they're not. If you're a knife guy, you're not going to be pleased with the edge. You're going to want to put your own edge on it. And with the Opinel, it has such a thin grind and such a good grind on it, even though it doesn't have a good edge. It's very easy to put a good edge on it, and it slices really well. Now, the Nortel comes from the factory razor sharp. You're spending a whole lot more money on the Nortel as opposed to the Opinel. So I wanted to point that out. The next knife in the French region is Laguiole. This comes from the En Bloc region of France, and this is kind of what I like to call my picnic knife. If I'm going to bring my own steak knife, or if I'm going to a picnic, company picnic, whatever, this is the knife I bring. It originates as a shepherd's knife, and they were very plain looking back in the day. This one has guillochage or firework. A lot of times with this firework, it'll be very specific to a producer of the knife. So an individual that makes one knife and sees it all the way through, they'll put their own guillochage on it, and that will be kind of like their signature. And this one has the cross in it, and the story is that you stick this in a loaf of bread or whatever and you pray to it. I don't need a knife to pray to talk to my God, but some people feel the need for that, and I don't agree with it, but that's the story behind the cross on this knife. Don't know if you can see it. This has juniper wood, which has a nice peppery smell to it. Very beautiful knife. Has the lamouche, or the bee. Lamouche actually means fly, but that's a bee. And they started out very plain, kind of a peasant knife, and then as French grew and became more cosmopolitan, the knife got an upgrade, and now it's a very elegant, a very beautiful knife that you can pretty much spend as much as you want to on. This is a Laguiole en Blanc, and this is a good representative of French cutlery. Most Americans are familiar with the Opinel, but to the French, I think this is what they would prefer to be remembered by. Then we have the Duc Duc knife, and the Duc Duc is produced in France, but it was made for the Melanesian market, and it's a very simple knife, folded sheet metal, and it's a slip joint, has a very strong spring, half stop. I'm happy to have half stop, because otherwise it's be like a guillotine for your fingers. But I'm going to have a separate review on this, but basically, in a nutshell, France wanted to make a knife for its Melanesian colonies, and the guy who invented or designed the Duc Duc was flipping through an encyclopedia and came across this fella. And he was like, okay, I'll put that on the Melanesian knife, which is going to be like Papua New Guinea and Micronesia and the different areas in that region, kind of north of Australia. They said, I'll put that on there to appeal to the Melanesian market. Well, it turns out people in Papua New Guinea and Micronesia, they didn't want the god of doom and destruction on their knife. This is a very evil dude, and I got a story. I have a whole thing to explain about this character when I do the review of this knife. But this is not a good guy to come into contact with, and you know, usually when this guy shows up, someone dies. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a story. My brother came across a documentary over a mission. Some missionaries who are bringing the gospel to Papua New Guinea, and they worship ancestors and different deities, and this guy actually comes out to talk to the villagers. Now it's a guy in a suit that's dressed exactly like this, and it's a man. Now if a woman sees the mask, I don't know if you can tell, but that mask right there, without a person in it, she has to die. They kill her because they don't want the women to know that there's a man dressing up as a deity. You know, they don't want that information to escape. So if a woman sees this mask not on a person, she has to die, and they kill her. And there's also a secret society in Micronesia where they dress up like this, and they pretty much go on raids, and they you know, kill people and do really horrible things. So that's the reason why this knife didn't do so well in Micronesia or Melanesia in Papua New Guinea, because no one wanted to have anything to do with this dude. And but this knife was very popular in North Africa. In fact, there's different variations of this knife. There was a Polynesian version that had a tiki on it. They had one that they built for the Muslim market in North Africa, because in Muslim religion, you don't want human figures on your weapons, or you really don't want human figures in art at all, because if you draw a dude on a piece of art or a weapon, someone can say, oh, that's Muhammad, and then they can kill you. So they made one that has what was described to me as a Muslim cross. It wasn't a cross, but it's a symbol that represents Islam in the African culture. It's not the crescent moon, but it's a different shape. And then they made one for the French and Canadian French market, which had a squirrel on it, and it's the same knife but with a squirrel on it, and it has pretty much that blade shape, but wider, bigger. So I want to point this out real quick. We got the Duke, the K55K, and the Hiko Nagami. These three knives, these two being the Yodel, this is a more recent thing, 1920s or 1930s. These are 1800s. But they all share the bent sheet metal construction frame, whatever you want to call it. I thought that was interesting. This one being my favorite. This one I have mixed feelings about. I'm not trying to review this knife, but this one has a rock red hardness of like 53. This is like 56. I don't know what this is. But yeah, so that's the French knives, and I actually know a French custom knife maker who immigrated to the United States. I have one of his customs, and I have some of his production knives. France has offered a lot to the cutlery industry, and I'd like to see that Americans recognize that more, because it's really, really interesting. But that's it. That's it on the French region. So I'm going to stop this video and move on to the next region.